They called him the cigar. Not because he smoked cigars, everyone did, but because even when bullets tore through his skull, even when blood pooled beneath him on a Brooklyn patio, that cigar never left his mouth. He built an empire on dope, ruled through terror, and died as he lived, defiant, arrogant, and smoking. February 24, 1910, East Harlem, Manhattan. In a cramped tenement building that smelled like rotting garbage and broken dreams, Camillo Carmine Galante was born to Sicilian immigrants from Castellammare del Golfo, a fishing village in Trapani, Sicily, known for producing some of the deadliest mobsters in Mafia history. His father had been a fisherman in Sicily, but in New York, he became nothing. The family lived in poverty, crammed into rooms with peeling wallpaper and rats that ran across the floor at night. Young Carmine grew up watching his father fail, watching his mother scrub floors for pennies, watching the city chew up immigrants and spit them out. By age 10, Carmine Galante was already a criminal. He wasn't stealing candy or skipping school. He was committing burglaries, assaults, and robberies serious enough that authorities sent him to reform school. But reform school didn't reform him. It radicalized him. By age 11, he'd formed a juvenile street gang on New York's Lower East Side. By 15, he'd dropped out of 7th grade. By 16, he'd committed his first murder, or so the rumors said. Galante had an extensive arrest record dating back to 1926 for assault, robbery, murder, grand larceny, alcohol tax violation, and narcotics. In 1930, at just 20 years old, Galante was arrested for the murder of an NYPD officer during a robbery. From 1931 to 1939, he was in prison, and it was during this stint that doctors at Sing Sing prison examined him and delivered a chilling diagnosis: psychopath. In 1931, doctors at Sing Sing prison had tested him and categorized him as a psychopath, noting that he had the emotional development of a child but the violent impulses of a monster. Carmine Galante had a mental age of 14 and an IQ of 90. And yet, he would go on to become one of the richest and most feared mob bosses in American history. Because intelligence isn't measured by IQ. It's measured by survival. And Carmine Galante was a born survivor. In 1939, Galante was released from prison and became a hitman for Genovese crime family underboss Vito Genovese. And Vito Genovese wasn't just any mobster. He was a ruthless, calculating killer who would one day become boss of his own family. According to FBI files, during the 1930s and 1940s, Galante served as an enforcer for Don Vito Genovese, including himself carried out several murder contracts. Genovese taught Galante how to kill efficiently, how to make people disappear, how to send messages written in blood. And in 1943, Galante proved himself worthy of the most dangerous assignment imaginable. In 1943, Galante made the mark that elevated him from ordinary gangster to mafia star. Vito Genovese, who had fled to Italy to avoid murder charges, had ingratiated himself with Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. Genovese tried to ingratiate himself with Italy's fascist Prime Minister Benito Mussolini by ordering the execution of Carlo Tresca, who published an anarchist newspaper in New York that was critical of the dictator. On January 11, 1943, Galante allegedly carried out the execution of Carlo Tresca, an anti-fascist journalist, in broad daylight on a Manhattan street. Tresca was shot once in the back, execution style. The assassin disappeared into the crowd. Carmine Galante had just killed a man on behalf of a foreign dictator, and no one could touch him. The murder elevated Galante's reputation. He wasn't just a street thug anymore. He was a professional, an executioner, a man you called when you needed someone dead and buried. And soon, another boss would come calling, Joseph Bananas Bonanno, who also hailed from Castellammare del Golfo. Galante was born and raised in East Harlem and became a protege of both Vito Genovese and Joe Bonanno, learning violence from one and leadership from the other. He was Bonanno's driver and eventually his underboss. Joe Bonanno saw something in Galante that others didn't: ambition without limits, loyalty without question, and a willingness to do whatever it took to make money. By 1953, Carmine Galante rose to become the Bonanno family's underboss, and that same year, Bonanno gave him the most important assignment of his life. In 1953, boss Joseph Bonanno sent Galante to Montreal, Quebec, to organize the family's drug business and rackets there. He worked with Vincenzo Catroni of the Catroni crime family in the French Connection. The French Connection was the most profitable dope smuggling operation in the world. The Bonannos were importing huge amounts of dope by ship into Montreal, and then sending it into the United States. Turkish farmers grew opium poppies. Corsican gangsters in Marseille, France, refined it into pure dope. Then it was shipped to Montreal, where Galante took over. Galante spoke various Italian dialects and was fluent in Spanish and French. This made him invaluable. He could negotiate with French smugglers, Sicilian mafiosi, and Canadian gangsters, all in their native languages. In 1953, Galante was sent to Canada to lead the family dope business. The Bonannos imported dope from Italy through Canada and then into the United States. Galante was ruthless as he led and had several carriers murdered for slow deliveries and other seemingly minor infractions. If you were late with a shipment, dead. If you skimmed product, dead. If you talked to cops, dead and dismembered. Police also estimated that Galante was collecting gambling profits in Montreal worth about $50 million per year. $50 million in 1950s money. That's over $500 million today. But Galante's violence caught up with him. In April 1956, due to Galante's strong-arm extortion tactics, the Canadian government deported him back to the United States. But deportation didn't stop him. It just moved the operation. In October 1957, Bonanno and Galante, now a consigliere, held a hotel meeting in Palermo, Sicily, on plans to import dope into the United States. Attendees included Lucky Luciano and other American mobsters, with a Sicilian Mafia delegation led by Giuseppe Genco Russo. The deal was struck. Sicilian mafiosi would smuggle dope into America. The Bonannos would distribute it. And Carmine Galante would run the entire operation. These young Sicilian men, such as Cesare Bonventre, were derogatively known as Zips because of how fast they spoke their native language. And Galante brought many of these Zips from his family home of Castellammare del Golfo, Trapani, to work as drivers, bodyguards, contract killers, and drug traffickers. The king of dope had built his army. May 18, 1960. Galante was indicted on several narcotics charges. Federal prosecutors had wiretaps, witnesses, and evidence linking him to one of the largest dope smuggling rings in history. His trial started in November 1960, but something strange happened. Jurors started dropping out one by one. Some claimed family emergencies. Others just disappeared. The judge suspected jury tampering but couldn't prove it. He was forced to declare a mistrial and sentenced Galante to 20 days for contempt of court anyway. Galante's second trial started in 1962, and on July 1, 1962, Galante was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was sent to the federal penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Most mobsters hated prison, but Galante? He served his sentence in the federal penitentiary at Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, and kept himself busy by working in the prison's greenhouse and looking after his pet cats. While incarcerated, he also enjoyed several other luxuries not normally afforded to inmates, such as choice cuts of meat from the prison butcher. As he did on the street, Galante demanded and received great respect behind prison walls. Even in prison, Galante ruled like a king. Guards looked the other way, inmates bowed. He ran rackets from inside, sent orders to the streets, and plotted his comeback. But prison walls did not stop Galante from planning his comeback. And in 1974, after serving 12 years, Galante was released on parole. The cigar was free, and New York was about to burn. Paroled in 1974, Galante returned to New York and immediately made his intentions of taking over the city clear. The day he walked free from federal lockup in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, he ordered the tombstone of one-time New York Mafia chief Frank Costello blown to pieces by a hunk of dynamite. That was his opening move. A message to everyone. I'm back, and I'm coming for everything. But the Bonanno family had changed. Joe Bonanno had been forced into retirement in 1968. The Commission, the mob's governing council, tapped Philip "Rusty" Rastelli as the boss of the Bonannos in 1974. But Galante ignored Rastelli's appointment and named himself the new Don. He didn't ask permission. He didn't negotiate. He just took it. When Rastelli was sent to prison in 1976, Galante seized control of the Bonannos as unofficial acting boss, and in turn becoming de facto boss. And then he did what he did best. He flooded America with dope. Galante increased the family's involvement in the drug trade, making Montreal their main pipeline for dope from France. The French connection flow gushed, and Galante and his associates made millions. His multi-billion-dollar international drug trafficking empire made him a billionaire, had a net worth of over $3 billion in 1978, $25 billion today. He controlled all of the dope importation in the United States and exported multi-ton shipments all over the world on a daily basis, making over $10 million a day, and at that time controlling the biggest dope empire in the world. $10 million a day. Carmine Galante ratcheted up the narcotics trade while plotting war on his rivals. He held the Gambinos and their boss, Carlo Gambino, in particular contempt, because of their long-standing rivalry with the Bonannos, and because they had been muscling into the Bonanno drug empire. So, Galante decided to send a message. During the late 1970s, Galante allegedly organized the murders of at least 8 members of the Gambino family, with whom he had an intense rivalry, to take over a massive drug trafficking operation. 8 Gambino soldiers, dead, all to reclaim his dope empire. Not since the days of Vito Genovese has there been a more ruthless and feared individual, said Lieutenant Remo Franceschini, head of the Organized Crime Intelligence Section of the New York City Police Department. The rest of them are copper. He is pure steel. But Galante made one fatal mistake. It became clear what Galante's ultimate goal was when he bragged to an associate he was becoming the boss of bosses, thereby threatening the commission itself. You can kill soldiers, you can take territories, but you don't threaten the commission. And Carmine Galante just signed his death warrant. On March 3, 1978, Galante's parole was revoked by the United States Parole Commission for allegedly associating with other Bonanno mobsters, and he was sent back to prison. However, on February 27, 1979, a judge ruled that the government had illegally revoked Galante's parole and ordered his immediate release. Galante walked free, but he didn't know he was already dead. The commission, the mob's governing council, had made their decision. The Gambinos wanted him dead. The Genoveses wanted him dead. The Colombos wanted him dead. Even Joseph Bonanno approved of the hit. From behind bars, Rastelli plotted with the Gambino and Genovese families to bump off Galante in spectacular fashion. July 12, 1979. Thursday. A sweltering summer afternoon in Brooklyn. Galante was killed just as he finished eating lunch on an open patio at Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant at 205 Knickerbocker Avenue in Bushwick, Brooklyn. He was dining with Leonard Coppola, a Bonanno capo and staunch Galante loyalist, and restaurant owner cousin Giuseppe Turano, a Bonanno soldier. Also sitting at the table were Galante's Sicilian bodyguards, Baldassare Amato and Cesare Bonventre. The same zips he'd brought from Sicily, the same men he'd trusted with his life. At 2:45 p.m., 3 ski-masked men entered the restaurant, walked into the patio, and opened fire with shotguns and handguns. Boom, boom, boom. Galante, Turano, and Coppola were killed instantly. Carmine Galante took a shotgun blast point blank to the face and chest, the force of the shots nearly decapitating him. And here's the part that became legend. A picture of the murdered Galante showed a cigar still in his mouth. Even in death, the cigar never let go. Amato and Bonventre, who had done nothing to protect Galante, were left unharmed. They'd been in on it. His own bodyguards, the men he'd trusted, they'd sold him out. Rastelli had his 2 top capos, Alphonse, Sunny Red Indelicato, and Dominic Sunny Black Napolitano, coordinate the details of the hit. First, they made a back-channel deal with Galante's inner circle, the so-called Zips from Knickerbocker Avenue, led by his personal bodyguards Cesare Bonventre and Baldo Amato, offering them promotion and a bigger piece of the family's drug rackets if they got on board with the gangland coup in the works. Galante had been betrayed by the very men he'd brought to America. Photos of the gruesome triple murder, featuring a slain Galante, with his trademark stogie still clenched between his teeth, splashed across newspaper front pages around the globe. The image became iconic. A dead mobster, face blown apart, blood pooling beneath him, and a cigar, still lit, hanging from his lips. The Archdiocese of New York refused to allow a funeral mass for Galante due to his notoriety. the king of dope was buried without the blessing of God. For his betrayal of Galante, Cesare Bonventre was subsequently made a capo in the Bonanno family, the youngest ever at the age of 28. He was rewarded for murdering his boss. But betrayal has consequences. Bonventre was later murdered himself in 1984, his body found stuffed in 2 oil drums. The commission took exception to Galante's power grab, and his murder was to be a statement. The commission's word is the word of God, no questions asked. Philip Rastelli reclaimed his position as boss of the Bonanno family, but the damage was done. The death of the mob boss exacerbated divisions within the Bonanno crime family that festered for years afterward. The Bonanno family descended into chaos. Capos murdered each other. Soldiers flipped and became informants. And the FBI? They smelled blood in the water. In the 1980s, the Pizza Connection trial exposed the full scope of Galante's dope empire. He soon became involved in a lucrative business known as the Pizza Connection, in which dope was imported from Sicily into New York pizza parlors. Turns out, Galante had been using Italian pizza restaurants as fronts to distribute dope across America. Millions of dollars in dope, hidden in tomato sauce cans, delivered to pizzerias from New York to California. The king of dope had built an empire disguised as a pizza delivery service. Law enforcement have accused Galante of participating in between 80 and 100 murders, though the real number is likely higher. He killed rivals, informants, slow couriers, and anyone who disrespected him. He had a mental age of 14, an IQ of 90, a psychiatric diagnosis of psychopath, and yet he built a multi-billion-dollar dope empire, controlled the French Connection, and nearly became the boss of bosses of the American Mafia. Because intelligence isn't everything, ruthlessness is. Carmine Galante understood one thing better than anyone. In the world of dope, fear is more valuable than friendship, and violence is the only language that matters. He didn't want to be loved. He wanted to be obeyed, and for nearly 3 decades, he was. Galante reputedly raked in millions of dollars per day, living like a king while bodies piled in his wake. But in the end, every king falls. And Galante? He fell the way he lived, violently, arrogantly, with a cigar in his mouth and blood on his hands. They called him the cigar, not because he smoked them, everyone did, but because even when the shotgun blast tore through his face, even when his blood soaked the Brooklyn pavement, that cigar stayed clenched between his teeth. Carmine Galante didn't just deal dope, he was dope. Pure, uncut, lethal. He built an empire that made him $10 million a day. He killed over 80 men. He controlled the French Connection. And he thought he was untouchable. But the mob doesn't forgive arrogance. And on a hot July afternoon in 1979, 3 masked men reminded him of the oldest rule in the underworld. You can be the king of dope, but you'll never be the king of kings. And when you forget that, they blow your face off in broad daylight while you're eating lunch with your cousin. The cigar went out, but the empire he built, it's still killing people today.